Have you ever felt completely invisible? Like the world looks right through you, judging your entire story based on a single, misleading cover? We're told never to judge a book by its cover, but let's be honest, we do it to people every single day. And what if I told you that the person you underestimate the most, the one you dismiss without a second thought, secretly holds the key to your entire world? This is a story for anyone who has ever been made to feel small, and it's a powerful reminder that destiny has the most incredible plot twists in store. Get ready for a story that will shake your beliefs about power, success, and the true meaning of kindness. On one side, we have Sean Ellis, a ruthless and cynical publisher at the top of the world, obsessed with one thing: finding the anonymous author of a sensational bestseller that is taking the world by storm. On the other, we have Melody Torres, a kind-hearted waitress working double shifts, so quiet and humble that she's practically invisible to customers like Sean. Two different universes that should never have collided. But a shocking twist of fate changes everything. Imagine this: the powerful publisher, after a frantic hunt, finally tracks his mysterious author to a grand mansion. He storms in, ready to confront the literary genius he's been chasing, only to find the local waitress holding the keys. You can just feel the ground shake as he looks at her, his mind refusing to accept what's in front of him, and he's forced to ask the question that changes everything. Wait, why you are the anonymous bestseller? This isn't just a love story, it's a story about the moment a man who worships power comes face to face with a woman whose strength comes from her soul. It's about humiliation and justice, about secrets and surprises, and about discovering that the person you thought was nothing turns out to be everything you were desperately searching for. The story of what happens when the waitress with the keys to the mansion is confronted by the publisher is one you won't forget. We're so excited to share this heart-touching journey with you. Before we dive in, let us know in the comments what beautiful city you're watching from today. We want to imagine the scenery with you. And don't forget to hit that like button. Follow our channel so you don't miss what happens next, and please, share this video with someone you know whose heart will be touched by this incredible story. Well, you know, destiny has a funny way of playing its cards, doesn't it? 1 minute, you think you're the king of the world, and the next, you're standing completely shocked in the doorway of a life-altering surprise. That was Sean Ellis, a powerful publisher, a man who built an empire on words but had forgotten their soul. He stormed into the grand mansion, not with an invitation, but with the force of a hurricane, driven by a single, all-consuming obsession that his world, you see, was being upended by an anonymous author. And who does he find in the grand, echoing foyer of this magnificent mansion? Not some literary giant or a reclusive genius he had pictured in his mind. Oh, no, he found Melody Torres, a waitress. The very same waitress had seen 100 times, the one he barely gave a second glance to. She stood there, not in a uniform, but holding a set of old brass keys, looking as out of place to him as a wildflower in a meticulously curated garden. The sight left him stunned. His mind, usually sharp and cutting, went blank for a second. This couldn't be right. It was a joke, a mistake, a plot twist too absurd even for the fiction he sold. Had spent a fortune, called in every favor, and pushed his team to the breaking point to find the secret author of the year's biggest bestseller. And his hunt, this grand, epic quest for a literary messiah, had led him to a waitress. It was a raw, emotional moment of disbelief for him. He finally managed to say, his voice a mixture of contempt and desperation. The sound echoed in the vast, empty space, a testament to his crumbling composure. Sean pointed a trembling finger at her, his composure shattered. He had built his reputation on being untouchable, yet here he was, completely undone by the quiet woman before him. This anonymous writer had created a love story for the ages, and all clues pointed to this impossible scene. He took another step inside, the heavy oak door swinging shut behind him, sealing them both inside the secret-filled mansion. The air was thick with the scent of old books and fresh paint, a smell of new beginnings and long-held mysteries. He looked from the keys in her hand to her wide, startled eyes. The pieces weren't just misaligned, they were from two different puzzles entirely, yet here they were, forced together by a hand of destiny he couldn't comprehend. With all his pride and frustration boiling over, Sean Ellis, the great publisher, looked at Melody Torres, the humble waitress, and laid his entire obsession bare. He ignored the kindness in her eyes, the story of hard work etched on her face, and asked the question that had haunted his every waking moment. Are you her? He demanded, his voice cracking. Are you the anonymous author of the bestseller I've been looking for? Now, to truly understand this story, you have to understand Melody Torres, that she wasn't a character in a book, she was the living, breathing soul behind one. By day, she was the quintessential waitress, a ghost in the machine of the city's hustle. She moved with a quiet, seamless efficiency, refilling coffee cups and taking orders, her kindness a small, unnoticed beacon in a sea of indifferent faces. It was a tough gig, working double shifts just to keep her head above water, but she never let the struggle tarnish her gentle spirit. Her real life, however, began long after the diner's lights went out. Late at night, in the sanctuary of her tiny apartment, a different Melody would emerge. Hunched over a worn-out notebook, she would pour every ounce of her observations, her heartaches, and her stubborn hopes onto the page. This was her secret, the anonymous manuscript that held her truest self. It was a deeply emotional process, a way to make sense of a world that often overlooked her. She wrote about the raw, unfiltered love story she witnessed between strangers, the quiet dignity of the lonely, and the surprising strength found in moments of despair. Her words weren't born from literary theory, they were carved from the reality of her life, from the people she served and the dreams she nurtured in silence. This anonymous project was her everything, a confession, a prayer, and a declaration that even a quiet life was worthy of a beautiful story. What a surprise it would be if anyone ever found out. You see, the manuscript was more than just a hobby, it was her lifeline. Each character she created was a mosaic of the souls she encountered daily, each plot twist a reflection of life's unpredictable nature. She channeled all the kindness she possessed into the narrative, creating a world where hope wasn't a foolish dream but a resilient force. This was her rebellion against the cynicism she saw every day, a testament to her unwavering belief in the good of people. And nobody knew. Not her coworkers, not her regulars, not a single soul. She was Veritas, the author's chosen pseudonym, a name that meant truth. It was a fitting title, for she wrote the truth of the human heart with a clarity that was both heart-touching and profound. The contrast between her exhausting life as a waitress and the rich, emotional world she built in secret was staggering. This duality defined her existence, the visible struggle and the invisible, brilliant art. She was living two lives, one of service and one of creation, completely unaware that her secret world was about to explode into the public eye. She just kept writing, an anonymous voice in the dark, spinning a tale of destiny that was, unbeknownst to her, her very own. The irony was as thick as the city smog outside her window. Meanwhile, in a high-rise office overlooking the city, Sean Ellis was a man possessed. As a top-tier publisher, had seen it all, or so he thought. He was a shark in a suit, with a reputation for being as brilliant as he was ruthless. Success had made him cynical, wrapping his heart in a protective layer of disbelief. He viewed emotions as a commodity and hope as a marketing gimmick. He thought he had the formula for a bestseller down to a science, but this new book broke all the rules. This anonymous manuscript, titled The Lighthouse Keeper, had landed on his desk like a meteorite. It was a phenomenon, a bestseller that defied every cynical bone in his body. The book was a raw, unfiltered love story, woven with threads of improbable kindness and defiant hope. Sean devoured it, not with admiration, but with a professional obsession. He was desperate to find its author, Veritas, not to praise them, but to brand them, to own the lightning they had captured in a bottle. The irony, of course, was thicker than a stack of unsold hardbacks. Sean would publicly mock the book's core message in meetings, calling its themes of unwavering kindness childish and unrealistic. Yet, in private, he couldn't stop thinking about it. The writing was so pure, so powerful, it got under his skin. This secret author was outselling his entire catalog, and for a man like Sean, that was the ultimate form of professional humiliation. And where did this powerful publisher unwind after a long day of hunting for Veritas? At a small, unassuming diner a few blocks from his office. He was a regular, known for being a particularly difficult customer, demanding, impatient, and quick to complain. He saw the staff as part of the furniture, invisible hands that brought him his steak and coffee. He never bothered to learn their names, least of all the quiet waitress who always served him. He'd sit in his usual booth, barking orders and scrolling through sales figures on his phone, completely oblivious that the very essence of kindness he dismissed as fiction was standing right in front of him, asking if he needed a refill. He saw a waitress, nothing more, never dreaming she held the key to the mystery that was consuming his every waking hour, the very author of the bestseller he so desperately craved. He was the hunter, and his prey was pouring his coffee. He was searching the globe for a ghost, while that ghost was asking if he wanted fries with that. Sean's world was one of power, money, and grand gestures, and he couldn't imagine that a literary masterpiece, a heart-touching story of destiny, could come from anywhere other than a world just like his. He was about to get the surprise of his life. It happened on a Tuesday, during the chaotic lunch rush. The diner was a symphony of clattering plates, shouting cooks, and the low hum of a dozen different conversations. Melody moved through it all like a dancer, a calm center in the storm. Sean Ellis, however, was not feeling the rhythm. He was having a terrible day. The search for the anonymous author was going nowhere, and his patience was worn thinner than a paper napkin. He was ready to find a target for his frustration. And his target, as it so often was, became the service. He flagged Melody down with an impatient snap of his fingers, a sound that made other customers cringe. Is this steak even medium rare? He scoffed, pushing the plate away. It's tougher than last week's news. And this coffee is lukewarm. For the prices you people charge, I expect something better than this. His voice was loud enough to make nearby patrons deeply uncomfortable, a deliberate act to humiliate her. Instead of shrinking or getting defensive, Melody simply met his gaze with a steady, unreadable calm. There was no anger in her eyes, only a quiet resilience. She didn't offer excuses or apologies laced with fear. I am sorry you are not satisfied, sir, she said, her voice soft but firm, a stark contrast to his abrasive tone. Let me get you a fresh coffee and have the kitchen prepare another steak for you immediately. Her kindness was a shield. Her reaction, or lack thereof, was not what Sean expected. He was used to flustering people, to making them crumble. It was a part of his power, a tool he used in and out of the boardroom. But Melody's quiet dignity didn't give him that satisfaction. For a fleeting moment, he was caught off guard, truly shocked by her composure. He saw a flicker of something behind her waitress facade, a strength he couldn't bully or buy. It was intriguing. He just grunted an affirmation and watched as she walked away, her back straight, her movements graceful. The encounter was over in less than a minute, but it left a strange residue in Sean's mind. He had tried to put her in her place, to exercise his petty dominance over a simple waitress, but he was the one who felt strangely small. He dismissed the feeling, blaming it on his foul mood and the stress of the bestseller hunt. But a seed had been planted. He had looked at her for the first time, not as a functionary, but as a person who refused to be broken. He didn't know it yet, but this small, seemingly insignificant moment was a crucial turn in the plot. Destiny had just nudged a key into a lock, and the world of a powerful publisher and a secret author was about to change forever. Back at the epicenter of his empire, Sean's publishing house was in a state of organized chaos. The atmosphere was electric, a mix of exhilaration and sheer panic. The book, The Lighthouse Keeper by the anonymous author Veritas, wasn't just a success, it was a cultural tidal wave. It was the kind of bestseller that publishers dream of, the kind that redefines careers and rewrites financial forecasts. And they had no idea who was behind it. The pressure was immense. Every morning, the sales reports would come in, each more staggering than the last. The book was outselling their entire combined catalog of established authors. It was a golden goose, but the goose was wild, and Sean Ellis, the renowned publisher, couldn't put a leash on it. His board of directors was breathing down his neck, demanding to know how they could capitalize on this, how they could sign Veritas to a multi-book deal. The office was a hive of activity. A dedicated team, led by Sean himself, worked around the clock, chasing down any and every lead. They analyzed the manuscript's metadata, traced the digital submission path, and cross-referenced the writing style with every known author database. It was a high-tech manhunt for a literary ghost. Every potential clue led to a dead end, every promising lead dissolved into smoke. The author was, for all intents and purposes, completely anonymous. Sean's obsession grew with every passing day. He felt that finding Veritas was a matter of professional pride. He was the publisher who could spot talent from a mile away, yet this author, the most talented of them all, remained a complete secret. He'd hold meetings where he'd project passages from the bestseller onto a large screen, dissecting the prose, trying to build a psychological profile of the writer. Who writes like this? Head rage. So full of hope. The search became the stuff of industry legend. Rival publishers were trying to solve the mystery, too, hoping to poach the author from under Sean's nose. It was a race, and Sean was losing. The more the book sold, the more powerless he felt. The story, a simple love story on the surface, was a complex puzzle that he, the master of the game, simply could not solve. It was a surprise that rattled him to his core. And so, the frenzy continued. Phones rang off the hook, emails flew back and forth, and expensive private investigators were hired. All in the desperate search for one name. Sean Ellis wanted his bestseller author, and he was prepared to move heaven and earth to find them. He had no idea that the answer he was seeking was not in some faraway literary circle, but just a few blocks away, in a place he considered utterly insignificant. One rainy afternoon, while Melody was nursing a cup of tea before her evening shift, a letter arrived. It was not a bill or a junk mail flyer. It was enclosed in a thick, cream-colored envelope with the name of a prestigious law firm embossed in the corner. Her heart did a little flutter of anxiety. Letters from lawyers rarely brought good news, especially for someone who lived paycheck to paycheck. With trembling hands, she tore it open. The words inside didn't make sense at first. They swam before her eyes, a jumble of legal jargon and formal phrases. She had to read the first paragraph 3 times before the meaning began to sink in. An elderly gentleman, a Mr. Alistair Finch, had passed away. Melody had never heard of him. But Mr. Finch, the letter explained, had heard of her. Or rather, he had heard her voice, through the words she wrote as the anonymous author Veritas. Mr. Finch had been a devoted reader. The letter stated he was part of a small, secret online fan community for The Lighthouse Keeper. Her book, her heart-touching story about finding light in the darkness, had brought him immense comfort in his final years. He had no living relatives, and he had been so moved by her work that he had instructed his lawyers to find the anonymous author he knew only as Veritas and make them the sole beneficiary of his will. Melody's breath caught in her throat. This had to be a mistake, a cruel joke. A plot twist from one of her own stories. But as she kept reading, the reality of it began to solidify. The inheritance wasn't a small sum of money. Mr. Finch had left her his entire estate, which included a single, primary asset, his fully paid for historic mansion on the outskirts of the city. The very same mansion she used to walk past on her rare days off, dreaming of what life was like inside. She dropped the letter, her hands flying to her mouth. A mansion. A home. It was an act of kindness so profound, so utterly life-altering, it felt like a dream. This was a surprise of cosmic proportions, a gift from a stranger who had understood the secret parts of her soul without ever knowing her name. It was the physical manifestation of the hope she so carefully wrote about, a message from the universe, or from Mr. Finch, that her words mattered. Stunned into silence, Melody Torres, the humble waitress, looked around her small, cramped apartment, the reality of the letter crashing down on her. She was now the owner of a mansion. Her life, which had been a predictable, straight line of hard work and quiet dreams, had just taken a sharp, 90-degree turn into the unknown. Destiny had arrived, not with a whisper, but with a lawyer's letter and the keys to a whole new world. News like that, doesn't stay quiet for long. A local waitress inheriting a mansion, it was the kind of rag storage's story that gossip feeds on. The tale spread like wildfire, from the diner's kitchen to the patrons, and eventually, it trickled into the high-end offices and cafes of the city's elite. It was only a matter of time before the story reached the ears of Sean Ellis, the publisher who frequented that very same diner. He was out to lunch with 2 of his senior editors, complaining yet again about the dead ends in the search for the anonymous bestseller author. It was then that he overheard a conversation from the next table. The name of the diner caught his attention, and then the word waitress and mansion. He pieced it together quickly. They were talking about her. Melody. The quiet one who had defied his arrogance with her infuriating calm. Sean let out a short, cynical laugh, interrupting his own meeting. Can you believe that? He said to his colleagues, gesturing vaguely towards the gossiping table. The waitress from the diner down the street. Apparently, some old fool left her a mansion. He leaned back in his chair, the picture of smug disbelief. In his world, fortunes weren't gifted out of kindness. They were earned, seized, or inherited through bloodlines. This smelled fishy to him. She must have really played her cards right, he continued, a dismissive sneer on his face. You don't just get a mansion handed to you for being a good waitress. She must have manipulated him, a lonely old man, probably. It's the oldest trick in the book. He was projecting his own cynical worldview onto her, painting her as a cunning opportunist. It was easier than believing in an act of pure, unadulterated gratitude. In his eyes, she was now not just a waitress, but a predator. His editors murmured in agreement, eager to please their boss. The idea of a simple waitress being virtuous enough to receive such a gift was as fanciful to them as the themes in the very bestseller they were trying to acquire. They laughed along with Sean, unknowingly mocking the very person their entire company was obsessed with. The irony was so thick you could cut it with a steak knife. Sean took a sip of his expensive wine, feeling a grim sense of satisfaction that his judgment of her felt validated, that she wasn't a woman of quiet dignity, she was a schemer who had finally hit the jackpot. That this belief settled comfortably in his mind, reinforcing his prejudice that he was completely unaware that his dismissive words were a profound injustice, a final act of humiliating a woman who was, in fact, the architect of the very success he so envied. The plot twist was waiting just around the corner. Melody felt the weight of the mansion not as a luxury, but as a responsibility. The extravagant gift was born from an act of kindness, and she felt compelled to pay that kindness forward. Her first thought wasn't of designer clothes or lavish parties. It was of Marge, the elderly waitress she worked alongside at the diner. Marge, who had been a friend to her, had a mountain of medical debt from her late husband's illness, a weight that stooped her shoulders more than her age. So, Melody did something quietly extraordinary. She went back to the law firm, arranged for a portion of the estate's liquid assets to be made available, and then, using an anonymous cashier's check, she paid off Marge's entire debt. There was no fanfare, no announcement that she didn't want thanks or recognition. It was a secret act of compassion, a way to honor the spirit of the gift she had received. It was a deeply emotional decision, a whisper of help in a world that usually shouts. Now, hey race where destiny, that clever old storyteller, steps back into the frame. Sean Ellis was on his way to his car after another frustrating lunch, his mind churning over the anonymous author. His route took him past the back of the city's main hospital administration building. And just as he was passing, he saw a familiar figure step out. Melody Torres. She was trying to be discreet, but there was no mistaking her. What on earth was a waitress doing at a hospital's financial office? Curiosity, that powerful, nagging emotion, got the better of him. He slowed his pace, partially hiding behind a large potted plant, and watched. He saw Melody speak briefly with another woman who was weeping with gratitude. He couldn't hear the words, but he saw the woman who he vaguely recognized as another waitress from the diner hug Melody tightly. Melody just smiled, a gentle, heart-touching smile, patted the woman's arm, and walked away, as if she had just done nothing more than return a lost wallet. Sean stood there, frozen. This didn't fit the narrative he had constructed. The manipulative gold-digger had imagined wouldn't be here, secretly paying off someone else's debts. He knew what hospital debt looked like. It was crushing. This was an act of profound, selfless kindness. He quickly put two and two together, realizing what he had just witnessed. He was shocked, and for the first time, a sliver of doubt pierced his cynical armor. He had been so certain of who she was, so smug in his judgment. But the scene he had just secretly witnessed presented a completely different picture. It was a picture of a woman who, upon receiving a fortune, chose not to elevate herself, but to lift someone else up. It was a gesture straight out of the pages of The Lighthouse Keeper, the very book he dismissed as unrealistic. The puzzle of Melody Torres had just become infinitely more complex. That single act of secret kindness shifted something in Sean. The image of Melody at the hospital replayed in his mind, overriding the caricature of the cunning waitress he had created. He was a publisher, a man whose job it was to understand character, and he had gotten this one spectacularly wrong. His intrigue, once a casual spark, now burned like a steady flame. He began to watch her, not with contempt, but with a new, analytical curiosity. He still went to the diner, but his visits were different now. He stopped burying his face in his phone and started observing. He watched how Melody interacted with the other customers, the patience she showed an indecisive tourist, the genuine warmth in her smile for a lonely regular, the subtle way she calmed a fussy child. He saw not a servant, but a quiet commander of her small universe, a woman of immense emotional intelligence. Behind her simple "Can I get you anything else?" he started to notice a depth had been blind to before. He saw the intelligence in her eyes, the way they would flicker with understanding or empathy. Her gentle smile wasn't a vacant gesture, it was a mask for a rich inner world. And the more he watched, the more a strange, unsettling thought began to form in his mind. Her demeanor, her quiet strength and profound kindness, reminded him of something. It reminded him of the voice of the anonymous author, Veritas. It was the same understated power, the same deep empathy for the human condition that made the bestseller so captivating. The author of The Lighthouse Keeper wrote with a wisdom that felt earned, not learned. They wrote about the beauty in small, selfless acts. They wrote with a soul that seemed to mirror the soul he was now, for the first time, seeing in his waitress. He initially dismissed the idea as absurd. A coincidence. His obsession with the book was making him see patterns where there were none. How could this humble waitress possibly be the literary genius that had the entire country in a trance? It was impossible. A woman working double shifts to survive couldn't possibly have the time or the energy to craft a novel of such staggering emotional complexity. And yet, the thought lingered, a persistent whisper in the back of his mind that he was a man who trusted his gut, and his gut was telling him something was there. The puzzle pieces of Melody Torres, the sudden mansion, the profound act of kindness, the quiet wisdom in her eyes were starting to form a picture he wasn't prepared for. He needed more information. He needed a link. The publisher in him was now on a new hunt, one that felt far more personal than before. Driven by this burgeoning, half-believed theory, Sean did what he did best. He started digging. But this time, his investigation wasn't focused on Melody directly. That felt too much like an invasion, and a small part of him was afraid of what he might find. Instead, he focused on the mansion. He turned the full force of his publishing house's resources onto the previous owner, the mysterious benefactor, Mr. Alastair Finch. There had to be a connection there. He hired a private investigator, the same one who had been failing to find Veritas, and gave him a new target. Find everything you can on Alastair Finch, Sean commanded. I don't care about his finances. I care about his habits, his hobbies, his online presence. What did he do all day? It was a shot in the dark, a publisher's hunch that felt both brilliant and insane at the same time. He was looking for a secret link. The investigator, grateful for a concrete lead after weeks of chasing shadows, delivered the results within 48 hours. The report was mostly mundane. A quiet, retired widower with a passion for literature. But then, tucked away in a section on his digital footprint, was the bombshell. Mr. Finch had been an active member of several online book forums. And in the last 2 years of his life, he had been almost singularly devoted to one. Sean's eyes scanned the page, his heart beginning to pound. Mr. Finch was not just a member of a fan group for the Lighthouse Keeper. He was its founder and administrator. Under a pseudonym, Old Sailor, he had created a small, private online sanctuary for readers who felt as deeply connected to the anonymous bestseller as he did. He was, for all intents and purposes, the president of the Veritas fan club. The report fell from Sean's hands. He stood up and walked to his window, staring down at the city below, but seeing nothing. The connection was no longer a vague feeling. It was a solid, irrefutable link. The man who gave the waitress the mansion was the #1 fan of the anonymous author he was hunting. There are no coincidences of this magnitude. It was a plot twist so perfect, he would have paid millions for it if it were in a manuscript. It was all there. The mysterious benefactor wasn't random. The inheritance wasn't a lucky break. It was a targeted gift, a thank you from a devoted reader to his favorite author. An author he had somehow managed to identify. An author who, by all logical extension, was now Melody Torres. The publisher in him was reeling, but the man in him was simply, utterly shocked. The revelation about Mr. Finch hit Sean like a physical blow, knocking the air out of his lungs. He sank back into his chair, his mind racing, trying to process the impossible. A waitress. Melody Torres. Veritas. He replayed every interaction, every observation, every dismissive glance, but now through this new, shocking lens. His memory searched for confirmation, for one more piece of evidence to make the unbelievable real. And then, it found one. His mind flashed back to a scene from a few weeks prior, an insignificant moment he had witnessed but not registered. A young family was in the booth next to his. Their toddler, overtired and fussy, had started to cry, a wail that cut through the diner's noise. The parents were flustered, trying to shush the child, feeling the glares of other patrons. And then Melody had approached their table. She hadn't just brought their check. She knelt down, getting on the child's level, her expression full of that gentle kindness he was now beginning to recognize. She had smiled at the crying girl and said, in a soft, soothing voice, "It's okay, little one. Even the strongest lighthouses get weathered by the storm, but they never forget how to shine." The phrase was so poetic, so strange for a casual conversation, that it had briefly snagged his attention before he dismissed it as folksy nonsense. But now, hearing those words again in his memory, his blood ran cold. Even the strongest lighthouses get weathered by the storm, but they never forget how to shine. That wasn't folksy nonsense. That was a direct quote. It was one of the most famous, heart-touching lines from The Lighthouse Keeper, from a pivotal, emotional chapter where the protagonist is at his lowest point. It was a phrase fans quoted in forums, a line that defined the book's entire philosophy. He scrambled for his copy of the bestseller, which was never far from his desk, and flipped frantically through the pages. There it was. Chapter 14. Word for word. The book in his hand, the memory in his head, and the report on his desk all screamed the same truth. A truth he had been too arrogant, too cynical, too blind to see that the plot twist wasn't just that Melody was the author, it was that she had been leaving clues all along, that she wasn't just writing about kindness, she was living it, that she wasn't just crafting poignant phrases, they were a part of her very being. The line she used to comfort that child wasn't a quote, it was an original thought that she had first given to a character and then to a little girl in a diner. The proof was undeniable. The anonymous author he was obsessed with was the waitress he had so callously humiliated. The dam of Sean's disbelief finally broke, and the truth came rushing in. Every small detail, every ignored clue, now clicked into place with horrifying clarity. Her quiet dignity in the face of his rudeness, that was the strength of her characters. Her secret act of kindness at the hospital, that was a real-life chapter from her own heart-touching philosophy. Her poetic words to a crying child, that was the author's voice, unfiltered and pure. He felt a wave of nausea. He, Sean Ellis, the celebrated publisher with an eye for talent, had been sitting across from a literary genius and had seen nothing but a waitress. He had scoffed at her, dismissed her, and felt contempt for her. He remembered his smug conversation with his editors, his cruel assumption that she had manipulated an old man for the mansion. The memory now made him feel deeply, profoundly humiliated. How could he have been so blind? His entire professional identity was built on recognizing brilliance. Yet he had looked at the source of the most brilliant work he'd seen in a decade and judged it as worthless based on a uniform. The image of Melody, patiently taking his demanding orders, flickered in his mind, followed by the image of her standing in the mansion, holding the keys. Two worlds, one woman, and he had understood neither. He was shocked not only by the revelation but by the depth of his own prejudice. He had chased the idea of veritas, putting the anonymous author on a pedestal, imagining a reclusive, tweed-wearing academic or a worldly intellectual. The reality was so much more powerful. The greatest voice of her generation belonged to a woman who knew hardship, who knew what it was to be invisible, and who wrote, not for fame, but because she had to. This was the ultimate plot twist, one that recontextualized his entire world. The bestseller he was chasing wasn't just a product to be acquired. It was the soul of a woman he had wronged. A woman who, despite being looked down upon by men like him, possessed more grace, talent, and kindness than he had ever encountered. The story wasn't just about a lighthouse, it was about her. The struggle inside him was immense. The arrogant publisher was at war with the humbled man. He had to reconcile the fact that the woman he disdained was the artist he admired. The creator of a beautiful, hopeful love story was someone he had treated with utter disrespect. The genius wasn't in some ivory tower, she was serving coffee, living a life he couldn't even imagine. And he had to face her. There was no more room for doubt, only for action. A frantic energy seized Sean. He grabbed his keys and coat, leaving the damning report and the bestseller on his desk like artifacts from a former life. He didn't even tell his assistant where he was going. He just left, moving with a purpose he hadn't felt in years. This wasn't about a publishing deal anymore. This was about something far more fundamental. This was about destiny. He raced through the city streets, his luxury car feeling absurdly out of place on this mission of atonement. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat of conflicting emotions. There was the publisher's awe, the sheer, unadulterated respect for her talent and for the masterful way she had maintained her secret. To write a masterpiece while living a life of such grueling anonymity was a feat of unbelievable strength. Then, there was the deep, gut-wrenching regret that every rude comment, every impatient snap of his fingers, every moment he had looked right through her, now played in his mind in a torturous loop. He had been so proud, so certain of his place in the world, and he had used his power to make her feel small. The thought that he had humiliated the very artist whose work had so captivated him was a deeply emotional and bitter pill to swallow. He pressed harder on the accelerator, the mansion's address burned into his brain. What would he even say? Sorry for being a colossal jerk, now will you let me publish your next book? It sounded pathetic, insulting. This wasn't a negotiation. It was a reckoning. He had to face her, not as a publisher chasing a contract, but as a man who had seen the truth and was horrified by his own past behavior. He was driving toward the biggest meeting of his life, and he was completely unprepared. There was no strategy, no angle to play. There was only the raw, shocking truth. The woman who held the keys to the mansion also held the keys to the literary phenomenon of the decade. The humble waitress was the queen he had been searching for. The surprise of it all still left him breathless. As he turned onto the long, tree-lined driveway of the mansion, the grand house came into view. It looked different now, not just as a piece of real estate, but as a fortress of solitude, a palace earned through words and soul. His hands trembled on the steering wheel. He was about to confront his biggest mistake and his greatest discovery, all embodied in one extraordinary woman. He was about to meet Veritas. Inside the mansion, silence reigned. It was a stark contrast to the storm raging inside. Sean Ellis' car. For Melody, this was the first truly quiet moment she'd had in days. The legalities were handled, the movers hadn't been called yet, and the house was an empty, echoing canvas of possibility. She stood alone in the center of the grand foyer, sunlight streaming through the tall, arched windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air like tiny stars. She clutched two things in her hands. In one, the heavy, ornate brass keys to the front door, a symbol of this new, unbelievable reality. In the other, she held something far more precious, her original manuscript. The notebook was worn, its cover soft with use, its pages filled with her familiar, cramped handwriting. It was the source of everything, the repository of her secret dreams and silent observations. A wave of overwhelming emotion washed over her, but for the first time, it wasn't anxiety or exhaustion. It was a profound sense of peace. She had spent her entire adult life running, working, and striving just to stay afloat. She had never had a place that was truly hers, a space where she could simply breathe. This mansion, gifted to her by a kind soul who had understood her work, felt like an exhale she had been holding in for a decade. She was still just a waitress in her own mind. The title of mansion owner felt like a costume she was trying on. But standing here, in this quiet cathedral of a home, she felt a flicker of a new identity. Maybe she wasn't just Melody the waitress anymore. Maybe she could be Melody the writer. Maybe the anonymous shield of Veritas was something she wouldn't have to hide behind forever. It was a surprising and dizzying thought. She ran a hand over the cover of her manuscript, a heart-touching gesture of a creator communing with her creation. This book, written in stolen moments between shifts, had built this house. The characters she had loved and cried for had, in a strange twist of destiny, given her a sanctuary. It was a validation so complete, so pure, that it brought tears to her eyes. They weren't tears of sadness, but of immense, humbling gratitude. She was so lost in her emotional reverie, in this bubble of peace, that she didn't hear the sound of the car screeching to a halt outside. She didn't hear the heavy footsteps racing up the stone steps. She was just Melody Torres, standing in her new home, holding her past and her future in her hands, completely unaware that her carefully constructed secret world was about to be blown wide open. The heavy front door flew open with a bang that shattered the mansion's peaceful silence. Sean Ellis burst into the foyer, breathless and wildered, looking like a man who had just run a marathon. He stopped dead in his tracks when he saw her. Melody stood there, bathed in the afternoon light, looking up at him with wide, startled eyes. The moment froze, suspended in a sunlit air between them. And in that instant, Sean's perception of her underwent its final, seismic shift. He didn't see a waitress. The uniform, the diner, the entire context he had built around her, simply dissolved. He saw a woman of profound strength, standing with a quiet confidence in the center of her own universe. He saw the worn notebook in her hand, the holy grail he had been searching for, and it looked perfectly at home with her. He was utterly shocked by the power she radiated. It wasn't the power of money or status, the only kinds of power he had ever truly understood. It was something deeper, more elemental. It was the power of a creator, of a soul that had observed the world's ugliness and had chosen to write about its beauty. It was the power of kindness, of resilience, of a spirit that could not be humiliated or broken by circumstance. He finally understood. Her greatest secret wasn't that she was the anonymous author of a bestseller. Her greatest secret was her own character. The love story she wrote wasn't just fiction, it was a reflection of the grace she carried within her. He had been so obsessed with the what who is Veritas, that he had never stopped to consider the why. Why did the book resonate with millions? Because it was true, and she was its truth. The mansion around them suddenly made perfect sense. It wasn't a prize she had won or schemed for. It was a fitting vessel for a soul as grand as hers. Sean felt an overwhelming sense of awe that he had chased a ghost, a brand, a phenomenon. But he had found a person, a woman of such immense substance that she made his own world of power and influence seem shallow and insignificant by comparison. He saw her clutch the manuscript a little tighter, a protective gesture. He realized that bursting in like this was another violation, another act of arrogant entitlement. His entire approach had been wrong from the very beginning. He had come here for a confrontation, for a final answer to his obsessive quest. But standing there, seeing her in her full, quiet glory, he knew this moment wasn't about him at all. It was about her. The silence stretched Thick with unspoken words. Sean took a slow, deliberate step forward, his hands raised in a gesture of surrender. All the arrogance, the cynicism, the hard shell of the powerful publisher, had evaporated. He stood before her, not as a hunter who had cornered his prize, but as a humbled supplicant. His pride was gone, replaced by a raw, painful vulnerability he hadn't felt since he was a child. Melody, he said, and her name sounded different on his lips now that it was spoken with a reverence that shocked them both. His eyes locked onto hers, and for the first time, she saw the real Sean Ellis, not the difficult customer, but a man completely undone. He gestured to the notebook in her hand, his own hands trembling slightly. Is that it? He asked softly, his voice thick with emotion. Are you the anonymous bestseller? Before she could even answer, the confession tumbled out of him. It doesn't matter. He rushed to say, I mean, it matters, but I already know that I came here to. That I don't know what I came here for. An answer, a deal. But now I'm here, and I just. He shook his head, struggling for words. Your book, he finally said, his voice cracking. I mocked it. I told my staff its themes of hope and kindness were unrealistic. A fantasy. He took another step closer, his eyes pleading. But I was wrong. It's not unrealistic. It's essential. I've spent my whole life building walls. And I didn't even realize I was living in a prison. Your words, they were the first ray of light I've seen in years. This was the ultimate confession from the cynic, a complete reversal of his entire philosophy. The heart-touching truth was that her story had started to change him long before he knew she was the author. I was so wrong about you, he continued, the words now a torrent of regret. I was arrogant. I was cruel. The way I treated you, the things I thought. I was a fool, and I am so sorry. I am asking, no, I am begging for your forgiveness. Not as a publisher, but as a man who was lost and whose life was touched by your work. He was finally admitting that he had been the one who was truly humiliated by his own ignorance. He stood before her, stripped of all his power, offering only his regret and a newfound, fragile hope. Forget the bestseller. Forget the contracts, he said, his voice dropping to a whisper. What I want to know is, can I have a chance to truly know you, Melody Torres. Not Veritas. You. The question hung in the air, the beginning of an entirely new and unexpected love story, a final, hopeful plot twist dependent entirely on her answer. And so, a new chapter begins, not on the pages of a bestseller, but in the quiet, hopeful space between two people who were brought together by destiny. What a truly emotional and heart-touching journey. We witnessed how a humble waitress, armed only with her kindness and a secret talent, could bring a powerful, cynical publisher to his knees. It's a story that reminds us that true strength isn't about how loud you are, but about the depth of your character, and that sometimes, the greatest love story starts with the most unexpected plot twist. Sean and Melody's story is a testament to the fact that everyone has a story worth knowing, far beyond the surface we see. From the moment he stormed into that mansion, shocked and accusatory, to the final, humbling plea for forgiveness, we saw a man's world completely redefined, not by money or power, but by the very hope he once mocked. And we saw a woman finally seen for the genius she always was. Now we want to hear from you. What part of this story impacted you the most? Was it Melody's secret act of paying off her co-worker's debt, or was it the moment Sean realized she was the author had been humiliating? Let us know in the comments below. And tell us, did you expect an ending like this? Or were you hoping for a different outcome? We love hearing your thoughts. If this story of love, destiny, and surprise touched your heart, please give this video a like. Make sure you follow our channel and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. We have a whole library of videos just waiting for you, and we promise, the next story is just as captivating. Thank you for joining us on this incredible ride.